All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to City Hall and the Housing and Urban Affairs Committee. I'm Councilman John Bullock, chair of the committee. Before we get started, I want to introduce our colleagues. So to my left is Councilman Bill Henry of the 4th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Chris Burnett of the 8th District. Councilman Z. Cohen of the 1st District. We're also joined by staff to the committee, Richard Krumerick. We also have representatives from the Council President's Office, from the Mayor's Office, from the Police Department, Transportation, Housing, and Public Works, as well as representatives from BGE. Again, I thank you all for joining us today. So ahead of us today, we do have an informational hearing as it relates to an offering from our colleague, Councilman Bill Henry, and that's City Council Bill 190179R, informational hearing for BGE planned power outages. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Councilman Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the past few years, BGE has been performing needed maintenance on infrastructure inside the city. To accomplish this maintenance, they have had a series of planned power outages in certain neighborhoods. Council members have received complaints about the process. These complaints have consisted of scheduling of power outages during severe hot or cold weather, not receiving adequate, if any, notice, receiving mixed messages from BGE customer service representatives, lack of information on the BGE website, including instances where the power was out but was not indicated on the website, no point of contact with BGE, cancellation notices sent after the outage date, and outages that have lasted longer than 12 hours. The City Council now seeks to understand how the city currently collaborates with BGE on planned power outages, how we can improve the communications process, and we look forward to having a good meeting. I thank the chair for scheduling this hearing so that we can have an opportunity to learn more fully how everything is supposed to work, and are there any ways that the city and BGE can work together better so as to provide a better result for our constituents and BGE's ratepayers. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. And also want to note that we've been joined by Councilmember Sneed from the 13th District. Thank you for joining us. And then also I want to recognize also emergency management being with us today. Looking at our agency reports, I know that we have no objection from most of our agencies, including the fire department. At this point, are there do we want to have testimony from some of our city agencies, or do you want to hear straight from BGE?
Whichever order you think would be best.
Does anyone want to testify from our agencies, or we can go to BGE? Sure. Okay, so does a representative from BG want to come forward? I know there's some questions that were submitted ahead of time. Sure.
Good afternoon. My name is Emanuel Moore. I'm the manager for external affairs for Baltimore Gas and Electric. And I did prepare opening remarks, if that's okay. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this topic of planned outages. How it helps to deliver safe and reliable service to our customers, and how we can better partner to make this process better for everyone. In case you didn't know, BG is the first gas utility in the United States, and as such, we're constantly maintaining and improving our systems to ensure we provide our customers with the distinctive service they deserve. To accomplish this safely, it's necessary for us to sometimes de-energize our equipment. The crews just can't work on live lines. When scheduling planned outages, we seek to minimize the customer disruption and, to the extent possible, remain flexible and open to rescheduling. If system conditions allow, we can sometimes push dates a couple days, couple weeks back to accommodate the convenience of our customers. We also provide advance notice to affected customers with details about the outage and how to obtain more information. While we understand that there is never an ideal time for everyone for a planned outage, we are committed towards an attempt to provide our customers with advance notice so that they can prepare accordingly. We recognize the importance of the service we provide to our customers, businesses, and entire communities, and work to ensure our system operates in a manner to continue to serve customer needs. In 2019, BGE invested more than $1 billion in our maintenance of our electric system, and as a result, the number of disruptions and the duration of service interruptions have significantly decreased. In the last 10 years, the improvements we have made helped to reduce the number of electric outages by 32% and the outage length by 40%. We regularly explore new technologies that can improve our system reliability. Examples include installing equipment that can automatically restore service or isolate damage to where when power goes out, only a small section is out at a time. Other things is we've modified our outage map, we've modified our app to report outages. We're starting to explore drone technology to inspect overhead lines in a more efficient and safe manner. And to address the concerns of today, we're exploring new digital communications to allow for more efficient, effective, and consistent notifications to include planned outages. We're committed to being the best utility we can for our 1.3 million customers, and we look forward to having the discussion today to see how we can do even better in this area.
Thank you. So I have a number of specific questions for BGE. I didn't know if you want to take questions from the committee, if you want me to break them up. Do you want me to go first or want me to go last?
Well, before you go, I want to also mention that we're joined by Councilman Ryan Dorsey, the 3rd District. Thank you for joining us. Again, if there are questions from the committee, sure, but I mean, feel free to go right ahead.
All right. So if you could start us off with walking us through BGE's policy for how you communicate with neighborhoods in advance of a planned outage.
Sure. So whenever we determine a local neighborhood for a planned outage, we try to give at least 10 days advance notice to our customers. And the purpose of that notification is to allow them to plan, make arrangements for either being somewhere else or just being aware that the outage is going to take place. And we notify those customers through letters. We actually pull the information from our billing system, and those addresses that are connected to electric meters is how we pull the data, and that's how we send the information to our customers.
Okay. Is there, I guess, okay, well then I'll take that as a segue into the next question of how do you communicate with the city? How do you communicate the same information? And when I say the city, how do you, which agencies do you specifically reach out to, and what's the schedule for that?
Sure. So whenever we take a planned outage, one of the first agencies that we have to contact is the Department of Transportation to apply for permitting to be able to do the work. Outside of the Department of Transportation, our interaction with other city agencies is perhaps non-existent to very minimal, unless we see an actual issue. Another reason why we work with the Department of Transportation is because sometimes those outages actually impact traffic signals. And in cases that takes place, we coordinate with the Department of Transportation to provide either generator or work with them to making sure that those lights remain intact while we're doing the work. Other agencies, I don't think we have any interaction with.
Are the individual microphones on, or do I have to call people up?
What's your pleasure?
Well, like that, yeah, because that makes me then want to ask DOT. So in the course of the permitting process for these outages, what city agencies sign off on those permits, or is it all inside DOT?
Do you mind repeating the question, Councilman?
Yeah. So no worries. So I'm just trying to understand how the process works in terms of if BGE comes to transportation to apply for the permit to do the work that they're going to need to do for the planned outage. In the process of approving that permit, is that particular permit all internal to DOT, or does that application get sent to other city agencies for approval such that this is how other agencies learn about the planned outage?
So we'll have to follow up with you on specifics to double check. I don't want to provide any misinformation here, but generally the permits for stuff like this is handled through our right-of-way division. So we can definitely follow up with right-of-way to see who touches those permits and sees those permits. So I'll write that down.
Okay, but so you're gonna check on that and get back to the committee.
Yes.
But so what I'm looking at specifically would be, for example, if there's a planned outage that's going to go through the evening hours in a neighborhood. At this point right now, whose responsibility is it to tell the police department that this neighborhood is not going to have any streetlights for X period of time on X night, such that the police department might want to take some type of compensatory measures to provide additional lighting, the generator-powered lights, if there are specific areas in the neighborhood that are, shall we say, of issue to the police department. How do they find out?
So just really quickly,
Introduce yourself.
Right, thank you. Sunny Schnitzer, Deputy Chief of Staff for Public Safety for Mayor Young's office. Just very quickly, I wanted to flag. So if I'm remembering correctly, there is a notification that should be going to BPD from BGE as well. I think I was copied on a message that there's at least a point person that should be receiving that information. We also have been in conversations with BGE about creating kind of a standard list of city agencies that should be getting notification, and not just agencies, but actually specific point people. So, that list includes the Office of Neighborhoods, BPD, emergency management, a broader kind of list, and we're scheduling kind of bi-weekly calls to check in to make sure, do we have everyone who needs to be on that list that's receiving the information? Are we running into any challenges? So that should be happening, but we're kind of creating some accountability mechanisms to make sure on our end, the people that are getting it the way they need to.
So I'm sorry, just to be clear, is the point person on the BGE side or on the BPD side? I'm sorry. You know what? I'll stop using acronyms for this one. Is when you reference that there is a point person, is that a point person at Baltimore Gas Electric, or is that a point person at the Baltimore Police Department?
So we are providing contact information for someone at the Baltimore Police Department to BGE.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm trying to decide how to ask this next part of the question in terms of how do we institutionalize that? I guess that's should we institutionalize that by asking BGE to make it part of their notification policy, that they reach out to DOT to do the permits, they reach out to this point person at BPD to notify them, and then they send letters to the neighborhoods? And do we make it part of BGE's policy, or do we make it part of the city's policy by asking DOT to incorporate the police department in their permitting process for these kinds of permits?
Can I just jump in for a minute?
And then Councilman Cohen after.
Because if we already have it, don't we already have a standardized process even for permits of housing? Like, I'm just wondering, before it even gets on the BGE end, what is our standard set up for when things happen internally with the city? So I guess that would be like, I'm just curious for when there's a huge fire, or when emergency management has to be called in, and then they have to spread the wings through DOT and everybody else, DBW. I'm just wondering, because that would be in-house in us. And if we already have a system in place, why are we reinventing the wheel almost?
So I guess if we treat these planned outages like planned versions of a sudden emergency, then how would we cope if there was all of a sudden a substantial sized outage? Who would be notified, and how would that be emergency management would coordinate that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so then should BPD just have their point person be at emergency management, and then emergency management can just follow the same protocol that they would follow if there was a planned or unplanned outage? And I assume that means emergency management would coordinate with BPD, fire department, and whoever else needed to be kept in the loop.
So normally for...
You got to come up to, and I think we're actually on camera. We're not live, but they're recording this. So you have to use the microphones when you talk, or the people at home won't get to share.
Sure. So normally for...
You have to introduce yourself when you...
Director McMillan, Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. So normally for an unplanned outage, OEM has a 24-hour a day, duty officer program where someone's on duty to respond to any kind of incident that would affect the citizens of Baltimore. So we receive a dispatch either from fire communications, or it could be from someone in the mayor's office or the councilman's office, or there's various ways that we monitor activity where we can dispatch a duty officer to help deal with the impact of the event. For a planned outage, I think we would need to determine a standardized process by which we would get that kind of basically messaging either ahead of time, in which case it wouldn't be a duty officer, it'd be myself or one of my deputy directors or my operations section chief, and then we could help make the notifications. I think who would be chosen to be that point of contact in my office, we could work with Deputy Chief of Staff Schnitzer and BPD to figure out what makes the most sense. Also working with BG&E to make sure that that makes sense to them as well. But my goal would be to increase coordination as much as possible.
So that's what you're thinking, right? Yeah. Okay, I got you.
If I could just add, in addition to kind of having an institutionalized practice for doing this, which is kind of what we're in the process of setting up right now, we also want to make sure that as many people as possible are getting alerts on the front end, which is part of why, because in addition to, having a formalized structure that we're going through, we want to make sure, for example, that the Office of Neighborhoods has information on the front end. They're mobilizing that. We want to be force multipliers with our partners at BGE, and that includes, making sure we're elevating information where appropriate on social media or things like that. So we're kind of in conversation right now to determine exactly what that looks like, but on the front end, in addition to having kind of a point person in OEM or BPD, we also want to make sure we just have as many people as possible aware of what's happening so that we can get that information out.
Councilman Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just two things to add. One, which I didn't hear, is making sure council members are included in that lineup as well. But two, in cases where there is some discretion, I think it would be helpful and appreciated to engage proactively with community as well as council members. For example, if there's a need to have a power outage in a business district, in a restaurant district, doing it on Friday night is not a good look. So there's just some sort of area-specific stuff that I think we and community leaders can be helpful with, which will avoid big blow-ups. So I think the more sort of, in addition to this standardized methodology that you're developing, Director Schnitzer, the more you can proactively engage with folks, understanding that it's going to need to happen and people don't want it to happen, but it's going to have to happen eventually. But there are some time-specific cases where it may be better for a neighborhood.
That's a great
Okay.
Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is somewhat related, but kind of off topic, but I have had numerous businesses, and in one case, one business over and over again have BGE place parking restrictions in front of their business and this is a heavily in and out traffic kind of business, where BGEs or their contractors more likely are putting up parking restrictions saying no parking here for literally a whole week. And in 2 out of the 3 cases, maybe 3 out of 3 cases that this one business came to me, the contractor never actually came and did any work. So they had prohibited the parking in front of this business for a whole week at a time for no reason whatsoever. And it seems to me that that's the kind of, it seems like a contractor taking a lot of liberty or the easy way out. Maybe this is somebody that you probably have a contract with them, to do 13, 14, 15 different jobs in all different locations, and they figure, oh, we're going to get to all of these jobs within this span of time. Somebody go out there this week and restrict all the parking at all of those locations for that whole next week or something like that, and then they, things don't go according to plan. And there's never once been any communication with the business owner or anybody else that's around there. So it's just.
Can I jump in for this, because I'm tremendously aware of that issue. I'm going to say, as from what I've been able to find out so far, that is less of a problem with BGE and more of a problem that we need to work out with DOT and the police department in terms of having more control over those parking restriction forms, the signs, the little placards. Yeah. In the past, I think that this is a little bit more under control now, but in the past, the police department just gave away stacks of them, of blanks, to contractors just because they asked for them, and contractors could pretty much just put in whatever they want. And we should have a separate conversation with DOT and the police department about better enforcement of how those go out, and also that part about how they'll just put huge sweeping restrictions on there because they want to make sure all the cars are gone on the actual couple of hours that they're really going to be there to do work. I'm thinking we should have a conversation about charging contractors on a per hour per space basis, that every space that they restrict for every hour, they pay a fee. And that might get a more reasonable set of requests from them for when they should be doing it. But I'm not, is there something you guys can do at your end to try to minimize that?
So to respond to Councilman Dorsey, I was going to say, even though we don't control the process by which these parking spaces are allotted to us, we can always do a better job in communicating. And so I can take that back as an action item, so that if we have to take up parking spaces, whether it's through this new process you're proposing or through the current one, we can do a better job at notifying merchants and the community of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing here, and I don't want to keep us off topic for much longer, but the simplest thing is, yes, communication with the merchants there, but also don't disallow your contractors from putting up a week-long restriction for a less than half-day job. That's not acceptable. I mean,
Agreed.
The business deserves all of the other 4.5 days.
If the work is not being performed and we don't need all that time, we shouldn't be taking up these parking spaces.
And Lieutenant Colonel Brown, sir, just to advise, we do not put the parking signs up or grant the permission anymore. We're not as intricately involved in that process as we have been in past years. DOT normally comes by and do all of that now.
Okay. But does BPD still gives out the cardboard? I mean,
Yeah.
as a contractor in the past, I've picked them up. I picked them up from the Southern Station myself.
Now, in the Southern District, if they're there, that would be surprising to me. We don't have them there.
Okay.
I was the commander there, so we're not involved in any of that process. Even if we have events for the community, we don't even go out anymore and put those up.
Okay.
That's all a part of permitting in DOT.
So the next question I had was about the nature of the planned outages themselves. How does BGE decide the order of the repairs, which neighborhoods go first, and so on?
Yep. So with planned outages, a couple of things go into our coordination of the where and the when. We do inspect our feeders periodically, and we can see when there is sort of wear and tear on the system. And those feeders that show to have signs of deterioration or it's time to replace a component, we'll put them on the list as sort of more of the immediate. There's also looking at historic reliability figures, so we can see which feeders are the poorest performing. Those feeders also get treated with prioritization in terms of upgrades and maintenance. And then there are things that pop up, such as trees that have overgrown and have started hanging over our wires. Sometimes we need to de-energize for that. So it's through inspection and it's through reliability data that we choose the locations and the timing for when we need to go out and do planned outages.
When a planned power outage goes on longer than was planned, how do you communicate that to the neighbors?
Admittingly, we need to do better. So we have used the automated dialer when an outage has surpassed the approximate time that we said that the outage should last for, but we've not been consistent as we should be. And so that is a trigger point for us to be innovative in our communications. And again, we are looking at the text alerts, email alerts, and perhaps even bringing back the auto dialer at a more consistent fashion. But we do need to get better in that.
How do you communicate with those ratepayers who have special needs, such as the ones who rely on some type of powered medical equipment during these outages?
So on bge.com, there's a form, and if you don't have access to the internet, you can reach out to our 800 number, and they'll help guide you through the process. But you can register any customer as a special needs customer. That doesn't, unfortunately, give you some sort of preferential treatment towards restoration. But what it does, it triggers our internal processes to provide perhaps advanced notification for what we see as being a severe impact storm coming in, and there could be some long duration of outages. During the planned outage process, we try to make use of that same sort of technology and outreach to special needs customers, but that again is a point where we need to be consistent in. I don't believe that we're doing that all the time for special needs customers, but you can register online and to make us aware of your condition.
Councilmember Sneed.
Thank you. I'm just curious, how often is one area hit? I'm not sure how many homes are connected or to one grid or something, but how often would you go to a Berea?
Yeah. So is it like how often does a community experience a planned outage? Kind of the question. It depends. It really does depend. I know that with the Greater Remington Improvement Association, that neighborhood experienced a series of planned outages. I believe that there was some systematic failure. So where when we try to do a planned outage, we try to do it, be one and done. And we try not to make the duration last more than 8 hours. But in cases where the duration is going to be greater than 8 hours, we try to break that up in multiple planned outages so that we can complete the entire feeder work. I don't know if I can answer your question exactly as to how many planned outages a community should experience a planned outage, but we try not to stack any one community with having multiple planned outages within a short time. And I would say a short time is in a few months. So I would go back and look into trying to answer that question a little bit more specifically, but that's the best I can give you right now.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. You said that the way that most of the residents get the official notification from BGE is by mail?
Yes.
So you're mailing to the same address that receives the bill?
Correct.
So in the case of rental houses, if the landlord is the person who's paying the bill, then you're mailing the landlord or the property owner, not necessarily the resident.
It's a gap. Yes, you're absolutely right. And so, through this conversation and the rest of our innovations, we will start to address that. But you're right, the majority, all of the customers who receive the notification are those who actually receive the bill each month.
Is one of the things you're considering changing your address base to when you're sending out these notifications, send to the impacted address as opposed to the?
Yeah, so that will be one of our focuses to make sure that whoever's actually in that residence will receive the notification of the outage.
And this may sound like a strange question, but the notice that you actually send out, is it a letter in an envelope or is it like a postcard?
It's a letter in an envelope, and I think the envelope says, does it say planned outage? A copy of that. The envelope. So the envelope comes in a white. I'll bring it up to the front. It says important.
I recognize that envelope.
Okay. Important planned outage notification.
That's a. Oh, I'm sorry. It says.
It says important planned outage notification.
In the small print under there. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if you have you guys had any conversations internally about switching to something more postcardish that just said in large, easily read words?
Yeah. So
basically that, but big enough that people might look at it.
Yeah. So we have had we.
I say this because we all share your issue of how do you get people to actually pay attention to important information you're trying to get them to know.
Yeah. So
everybody in this room deals with that problem.
Yeah. So with the postcard, we've had that conversation, and then within the discussion, one of the concerns that we have is through the mail is an exposed notification that's letting people know when your power is going to be out. And if someone were to see the postcard and see that a certain neighborhood was going to be out on a certain day at a certain time, one could plan something that would not be the nicest of things to do when the power is out. So we are really starting to look forward to more digital communications and target cell phones and target text messaging as a way of getting the notification seen more effectively than even perhaps what mail can do.
Okay. I'm actually gonna have to think about that one for a little bit. That's a good level of paranoia. Okay, I get that. Okay, I get that. That's a good level of paranoia. All right. Well, I guess we've already kind of covered this in terms of you're working on a way to allow your alert system to reach renters who don't pay the bills. Okay. How far in advance do you plan out the planned outages?
I only laugh because the planned outage work is heavily dependent on the weather. And so, the reason why we send the notifications within 10 business days is because we can kind of track weather a little bit better and notify the customer one time without having to switch up because we've experienced a code blue day in between or things of that nature. I think internally, our crews are inspecting and ready to sort of perform work within a 60-day period. But again, we hesitate with providing 60-day advance notice to a customer, knowing that any type of unforeseen circumstance can change that, and customers preparing for that 60-day window would have to perhaps get a second and a third, perhaps, notification because something has changed.
Would you be able to, once we're firm on who our point person is at the city, would you be able to provide them with a regularly updated 60-day map of which neighborhoods are going to be done when? Because I can tell you, the city agencies, we work great with constant change. So if you need to edit that map a week later or 2 weeks later, that's cool. There'll be somebody who'll just keep the most recent one on file. But if the city had access to that, it would probably also pay benefits in the permitting process as well, because if you're planning that far out, then maybe we can even try to work out a way where DOT is expecting these permits and might be in a position to,
Yeah.
handle that workflow more efficiently.
Yeah, I think it's an idea worth considering. I would like to go back to leadership just to make sure that there's nothing that I'm overseeing that I could answer too simplistically. But I think it's an idea I can take back and I can report back to this council on what we can do with that.
Okay. Who is the oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to mention, Councilman, that we did hear back from the right-of-way division, and the permits that are issued for the planned power outages are generally kept internal. However, there is precedent with like our special events permits in terms of cross-agency coordination. So it's a conversation that I think we're committed to having after this hearing.
So on your end, who is the best point person to deal with this issue?
So it's difficult to have one person on just the entire issue, but I would say the External Affairs Department. So Jay Bennett is sort of heading that seat for Baltimore City. So I think all things can come through Jay, and he can funnel information appropriately through BGE.
Okay, and so this is the last one of my preconceived questions. We have had some pushback from the community, folks asking for more notice.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying in terms of 10 days helps to minimize the potential for weather-dependent change. But 2 weeks would give people more time to make their own plans, and sometimes those need a little bit of time. Also, and I wasn't sure how to address this part, but if you're mailing stuff, mailing something, shooting for it arriving 10 days before kind of puts you at the mercy of the post office. And it might be a safer thing to just have a further out goal to minimize the possibility that the post office's issues become your issues.
Yeah. I think it's doable. I think the 2 week, what you're asking, and perhaps even more, it's something we've been talking about as of recent, but also in past months, and I think that is doable. I can say that without even having to go to our leadership.
Those are, that's what I had in advance.
Any additional questions from committee members?
I didn't hear that.
I tried.
Any from our agencies? All right. Okay, public testimony. I know that we have some members from the public. If you're, let's see, Fong Lee.
I'm also, Marcia did want to.
Do you have some? Yes, please. 1 second, sir.
I just wanted to mention that for Public Works, we've had very good communication for planned outages with BGE. We have a list of contacts because what we have to prepare for is for our water systems and our wastewater systems. They operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since the day they were put into service. Most of our large facilities have dual feeds, so usually the planned outages don't impact both dual feeds, so you can usually switch from one to the other. Some facilities have generators on site, and we can utilize those if need be, and we also have portable generators. So we can, working with BGE, we've been able to do the transition very smoothly and to get a heads up when things are coming back online to get back in session. So this way we're not impacting water supply or wastewater cleaning. So it's worked very well for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee, please.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Fong Lee. I'm the president of the Greater Remington Improvement Association. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, BG. Thank you, council members. Here to tell you a little bit about our experience in Remington with the BGE planned outages. it sounds like a lot of the things we have concerned with, y'all are working on, and I'm really appreciative of that. But I do think it's important to know, like, the story from the ground, so to speak. One thing that struck me about this, I kept thinking about during this meeting about this sort of famous meeting in our neighborhood where both BGE and BPD were presenting. And I sort of had assumptions about how people would react to these different agencies. This is in the middle of our outage year, pretty much, from BGE, and a lot of the ire, which I assumed would have been directed toward BPD about a lot of stuff that was going on, all that energy was directed toward BG&E. A lot of these concerns that have been brought up around miscommunication, lack of community engagement, and just confusion. Really, it was strange for me leading that meeting. But I'll tell you a little bit about some of the more specific concerns we have. Although I should mention, I am very encouraged by some of the conversation I've heard today. I'll tell you a story from a neighbor of mine. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner. She was out late one night, came home. She's on call for her office, so that's what means parents with sick children and emergency medical situations, they would call her. But the power is out, her phone was low on batteries, and typically, as I understand it, BPD's practice during one of these outages is one of the maintenance vehicles should have trucks out so people can plug in their phones and charge their devices. No truck was to be found, so she had to go and wander around the neighborhood and find an open plug outdoors and plug in her phone with her partner in the cold in the middle of the night so she could take phone calls from parents with sick children. I think that was sort of striking to me. I just heard that one a few months ago. A few other, and so that was, I mean, that's something. And I immediately thought of residents, as you said, there's this communication gap between residents who who rely on medical devices and how they're communicated. There's an awful lot of legacy residents who've been living in the neighborhood for 20 years or more. Often these are renters who have breathing apparatuses and other devices, and they don't get these notifications. We reach out to the few we know, the few who've contacted us, but I think that is something I think about all the time in the midst of all this. One other issue that many neighbors brought up, there was something like a 48-hour gap where the streetlights weren't working on 28th, all the way from 25th to 29th Street. This is coming right off the 83. It's a very dangerous intersection during normal conditions, and those lights were out for about 48 hours. I understand that BG is, with all of you, are asked to ensure safe pedestrian crossing while the lights are out. That was certainly not the case during that time. One thing, and I'm glad there's some conversation around this, about proper communication protocols with the BPD. When I suggested that when the lights are out, maybe you call the police. I was told that this was not part of the protocol. I think it was Officer Foster once said he was just driving through the neighborhood and noticed all the street lights were out and decided to park his car and turn the lights on. All the lights were out at 11:45 at night, and apparently the BPD was not contacted. I'm very thankful for Sergeant Amy Street for being proactive and contacting the BPD to get on their listservs and their alert listservs to make sure some of that's happening now. I feel very lucky that we have a good officer working with us. More broadly, I would just say there's a general lack of communication, or it was unclear who our point person was. I've been told at different times it was Jay Bennett or Fabiola, and it keeps on switching, and I wasn't sure who to contact about which issues. A lot of the residents sort of don't find out things until too late, or they contact me, or they contact our council representation, and often these are during extremely cold weather or warm weather. And we sort of scramble to try to get these things worked out. I also know there are oftentimes you have to make tough choices between, do we shut things down that would impact residents the most or businesses the most, and somehow pitting these two pieces of the neighborhood against each other to make these tough calls. I think it's very unreasonable, and there should be a way for us to work together to kind of talk these things out and make these selections and doing this plan. I know that Remington was one of the first neighborhoods chosen for these energy switch upgrades, and during that very same infamous meeting, was when we found out that this was the case. Really found out, and I think it was very surprising to me that one, to learn about, all of our aging infrastructure and its necessity, but also this is the first time we'd heard of it. I know many of my neighbors would have been much more sympathetic to the severity of our infrastructure needs had we have known, instead of saying this is a planned regular maintenance and it's just business as usual, but also we have to shut down your power several times in the next few months. Once we understood that these were severe, there's some severe issues with the infrastructure, I think it was much easier to kind of be sympathetic, but we found out sort of in the middle of this process. I'm hopeful that we can come up with a better protocol that involves much more community engagement in the future. I'm hopeful that that everybody in this room can work together to contact everybody. I think about all the times I called 311 or 911 when all the power went out and said, can you send someone out here? The lights are all off. Or checking online and looking at BGE's website to see that this outage that might or might not have been planned does not exist anywhere on their website. I also tried to sign up for their phone alerts, and I've never received a phone alert. And so there's all these things that I would consider low-hanging fruit in terms of basic communication that can be picked off that would immediately, restore my confidence that we can choose when we do outages and time them in a way that would have the least community impact. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective. Are there any other community residents who would like to speak? Any other commentary from our agency representatives or BG? Questions? Okay, I think we're ready to vote.
Okay. So, sometimes with these types of issues, we will officially leave the legislative item open. We won't have a final vote on the day of the hearing, so that we can come back and have successive hearings. I'm going to show what I hope is well-placed confidence in everybody, in our ability to make the corrections that we've identified here today. So I am asking the chair to hold a vote saying that yes, we have this hearing, and I'm hoping that means we won't have to come back and check in and find out what didn't happen, 3 to 6 months from now. So I thank you. I'd like to move a favorable report on this resolution.
Yes.
Chairman Bullock votes aye. Vice Chair Schleifer appears to be absent. Mr. Burnett? Aye. Mr. Burnett votes aye. Mr. Cowan?
Aye.
Mr. Cowan votes aye. Mr. Dorsey?
Yes.
Mr. Dorsey votes aye. Mr. Henry?
Aye.
Mr. Henry votes aye.
Emphatically.
Member Sneed?
Yes.
Member Sneed votes aye. Mr. Chairman, 6 votes in the affirmative, no negative. We can go to second read at the next council meeting.
All right, thank you. And thank you so much for coming out today, for sharing your time with us. Again, make sure you take any belongings you brought with you to City Hall. And again, thank you for joining us. Have a good rest of the day. We'll stand adjourned.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
That's a very pleasant